Located near Reigate, Surrey, Gatton Park is a country estate that was originally designed by the famous landscaper Capability Brown. I'm here at Gatton Park ahead of the 25th anniversary of the restoration of the Japanese gardens. Originally built in 1909, the gardens were lost for almost 50 years until 1999, when the Gatton Trust decided to recreate the garden and return it to its former glory. I spoke with the Park and Gardens manager Dan Ryan to find out more about the mystery surrounding this lost garden.
We're down here in the Japanese garden, which is a garden that we're due to be celebrating our 25th anniversary of restoration, just coming up in April. It was originally commissioned by Jeremiah Coleman, the great mustard man, in the early 1900s, and it was unfortunately lost for many decades. But due to the work of the Gatton Trust, it's been restored over the last 20-odd years. The garden was set in the early 1900s, about 1909, and that was right about the time that Japanese culture and Far Eastern culture was being exposed to the Western world. And at that time, when the Coleman family owned the estate, it was a real opportunity for them to show their wealth and opulence by sending somebody out to Japan and bringing some of these the artifacts that show the Japanese garden off. Jeremiah Coleman himself passed away in 1941, in early part of World War II, and at that point the estate was disbanded. Shortly after that, it was acquired by the Royal Alexandra and Albert School, and that was part of the wishes of the Coleman family for it to become an institutional estate. At that point, the gardens, as you said, were lost, and basically maintenance was focused up and around the school side of the estate. So going right the way through till about the 1990s, when the Gatton Trust was formed, that's when the interest in the gardens sort of started to take shape a bit.
Louise Miller is the head of the Gatton Trust, and she was kind enough to speak with me about the work the Trust do to keep the park running ahead of the Japanese Gardens' 25th anniversary event.
It's a long way back now that our charity first began volunteering in 1995, and at that time a lady called Pat Pay was living here on site. She loved gardening and was really fascinated by the history of our estate, and she approached a television production company who were going to transform gardens, historic gardens, in only 5 days. And luckily we were selected to be one of those gardens.
Before the restoration process, you wouldn't have been able to see anything here behind you. It would have been completely overgrown. The water was, and the ponds were completely gone. It looked like a bit of a swampy mess covered in self-seeded ash trees. There was dozens of ash trees that were removed from the gardens. The ponds were redug out and redesigned. The cascade at the top was rebuilt, and actually over the last 25 years the tea hut that you can see behind me was rebuilt several times, unfortunately, due to a series of a few different events. Well, we're just heading into the Japanese garden here at Gatton Park, so let's go have a look. Nice Emelanchia here, which is just in bud, and in about a month's time that'll be a beautiful white blossom. And just as soon as that goes over, we've got these viburnums on the left here, which will be again followed with that nice big white blossom. The leaves have just come out here and they've got that fantastic spring leaf color. Just on the right is the cascade into the garden, and there's a great big pond at the top which filters into the garden, and that runs throughout the Japanese garden and down beyond that bridge and follows in and down a canal and into the rest of the park, into the big main lake. This tree that we're just passing here is called Ginkgo biloba, and it's one of the few trees that were remaining from the original garden. So when the garden was restored in the 1990s, this was one that was actually on the chopping block because it was completely covered in ivy, but one of our tree surgeons came along, completely stripped it and re-exposed it, and we're sure glad he did. This bamboo, again, is one of the few plants that were remaining from the original garden, and it was a big, massive clump of bamboo here that's stood the test of time. There's other areas of the garden where we had to remove bamboo that had been planted over the last 20 years or so because it had become too invasive, but this is part of the core of the garden, as it were. The garden isn't an authentic Japanese garden per se, because it doesn't show the same qualities as some of the specific gardens like a strolling garden, a zen garden, or a tea garden, but it has those elements that you'd expect to see in a Japanese garden. It has the bridge, it has the flowing water, it has lanterns and acers and things like that, and that's what gives it its character. So the way we try to manage it now is a sort of Edwardian interpretation of a Japanese garden. Now that we're in the garden, you can see there's the typical Japanese lanterns and the archetypal red bridge. So let's go walk over it and have a look. So every Japanese garden should have a tea hut, I suppose. In a traditional garden, this would be a tea garden, and the whole thing would be based around the tea hut and the traditional tea ceremony. But in our garden, it's just one of the aspects of the garden and one of the features in the garden, as it were, and that's part of this Edwardian interpretation of a Japanese garden, I suppose. But when you come up and have a look, it gives you the best aspect to have a look at the garden itself. My favourite view from here is to look across toward that bridge. You get the reflection in the water and the fantastic stems of those Japanese black pines. We're in early spring at the minute, and the things that are just starting to take off are some of the spring bulbs, obviously. We've had a series of snowdrops come through, and daffodils are now just coming through at the minute. And then things like primroses, which hopefully you'll see some in the background that are starting to carpet around the back of the garden, followed by hellebores, which I really love. They have that beautiful open bell-shaped flower, and then the nice architectural leaves throughout the summer. This is one of my favorite little plants in the garden. This is the Prunus Kojo no Mai, and it's a fantastic little dwarf flowering cherry, and at the minute it just looks perfect. It's beautiful, delicate flowers, and come summertime when the flowers go, you'll barely even notice it, but right now it's a nice little charm.
So the garden has continued to evolve over the years. We have a core of the history and the heritage of the garden which we're working with, but we are always keen to add interest and development to it. So for example, our 100 cherry trees that we received from the Japanese embassy have now formed a beautiful entranceway into the garden, and that's not part of its original nature, but it's added interest to the garden. So I'm sure that will continue into the future. As new opportunities arise, we will keep changing it and adapting it while keeping that heritage at the core.
One of the more recent features of our Japanese garden here is the glade of flowering cherry trees, and they were planted about 3 years ago as part of the Japan-UK Sakura project. We planted 100 trees, and that includes 3 different flowering varieties. That's to give the breadth of interest over the spring. This variety here is called Prunus Some Yoshino, and it's one of the most widely planted flowering cherries in Japan. It's an early pink flowering cherry, and that will be followed by 2 other varieties. One is a double pink flowering cherry, followed by a white flowering cherry, which is called Taihaku, or the great white cherry.
So our garden, although being a beautiful place to come and visit, is a school for most of its life. And we are only able to allow visitors to come and join us on certain days of the year. We do try to have as many people as possible by having organised visits for both schools or tour groups, but we can't fling our doors open to the members of the public every day of the year for safeguarding of our children. And so we have certain days that people can access through our website when they can come and enjoy the grounds, just as a leisure activity to walk around or to join a tour.
Looking after the garden is a privilege, and seeing it both move throughout the seasons, but also seeing it develop over the last, my time here and hopefully beyond. We've come a long way, I think, in the last 25 years since the restoration of the garden, and hopefully that'll carry on right into the future and it will be in safe hands going forward.
If you want to find out more about Gatton Park and their open days, head over to www.gattonpark.co.uk. Make sure to like, subscribe and share this video to see more wonderful British gardens. Thanks for watching!